Insert elevator hold music.
It's a bit like that sometimes.
Hey guys, I can see a few of you joining now. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. We'll kick off. How's everyone's week been so far? Hopefully not too frantic.
No, it's been busy for us here.
That's IT though, right?
Yeah, there's never nothing to do.
Yeah, that's it. It'll be dull and boring. That's why we're in IT. Keeps us on our toes. All right, we might just kick off. So guys, welcome to our first technical workshop for 2022. That is crazy. I can't believe we're in February already. This session will be recorded. So if you want to refer back to it or share it around afterwards, feel free. Like always, you can always book a one-on-one with our team or one-on-many. If you want to book technical training with us, just reach out to your account manager or Meryl, our partner success manager. We're happy to organize that, at a time that works for you guys, and cover any topics that you want to sort of deep dive into as well. So today we're covering SD-WAN, a little bit of an overview. Our last one, we kind of added a little bit of sales bits and pieces in there. Today, we're going to be focusing a bit more of the tips and tricks and things the gotchas that we sort of see support tickets for, to make sure that it's a smooth experience when you're deploying this, to make sure that the deployment is successful, but also, your day-to-day operation of the platform is nice and smooth. So I'm joined by our partner support manager, Dylan. So Dylan, thank you for joining me.
That's right. Glad to be here.
So very quickly, SD-WAN basics. We'll then cover some best practices, troubleshooting tips and tricks, and we'll cover the provisioning process as well. If you've got any questions, if you want to sort of ask anything at all, just drop it into the chat, and we'll sort of we'll answer it as we go. So to jump into it. So what is SD-WAN? I guess the thing to keep in mind with what is SD-WAN is that it is a buzzword. It's like saying that you work in IT. There are so many different areas of IT, and SD-WAN has kind of become one of those terms as well. So the big thing with us is that we're kind of a hub and spoke model, right? And the big thing that allows you a big advantage for what we provide versus, say, a Meraki, is that we can provide aggregation of connections across diverse carriers, right? So let's just say you get a connection from Hosted, you get a connection from Aussie Broadband. It could be a 4G service from Vodafone. Nothing fancy. It could be an MPLS connection. It can be anything, basically. We can basically provide a dedicated IP address over the top of that service, one of a hosted network IP address. So regardless of that connection, that IP address remains the same, right? So easy example of that is, imagine if you move office, all your DNS records and things like that. You don't have to change anything. You literally just pick the device up and move it to the new location, and all of your DNS records and things like that will remain the same. The internet connections underneath can chop and change as much as you like. You can unplug, plug, and the service will sort of keep going. And then the aggregation piece of it is a big piece of it. So if you think of something like a Fortinet SD-WAN solution or a Meraki SD-WAN solution, then they're going to sort of provide you more load balancing, right? You might be getting connections going out one connection, and then something else going out another. But each of them are going to have their own IP address, and they're not going to really aggregate the connection. So let's just say you've got two NBN 100 by 40 connections. With us, you can kind of aggregate the two of them together to make one big pipe. Easiest example of that is you do a speed test, right? And you see the speed test where you see the combined speed versus just the maximum of that connection that you're going over, which is what you're going to get with something like Meraki or Fortinet's SD-WAN solution. So moving along, I've sort of probably covered a couple of these already, but they're the two big ones that we really see. You can, over our solution, like all SD-WAN solutions, you can create private networks, right, very easily, right? So you can join different sites together like they were on the local network, which makes things like routing and whatnot very, very easy. And you can, we've got that second point there that you can, let's say, very, very common to put a firewall in the data center that, maybe on our infrastructure or co-located, and that sits in front of all the sites, right? So you have an SD-WAN device at each site, regardless of their connections, they plumb everything in, and then it's protected by a central firewall. And it's all sort of point and click, right? So you don't really need to have any advanced networking skills to sort of piece that together, which makes support and things easier as well. All right, so SD-WAN is really providing that, well, software defined, right? And that software piece of it is the smarts versus, you needing to know, okay, I've got to configure, BGP or OSPF or whatever it might be. You just point and click, and the system figures it all of that routing and whatnot out for you. The other bits and pieces is there's smarts in there, right? That's in that software defined piece of it. It's using things like, packet prioritization and packet steering to determine which link it should go out via, things like that. Handling the failover automatically, all of those bits and pieces if you've configured it like that. And again, really just making your life easier when it comes to these things. From our portal, you also get a lot of visibility, right? So you get a very friendly, easy to use portal that sort of shows you the bandwidth of each connections, and all of those configuration bits and pieces. So yeah, and like I mentioned before, our SD-WAN is entirely carrier agnostic, right? So regardless of whether you have a connection with hosted network or it's, with, God forbid, Telstra, you can plumb it in there and away you go. So that's very quick. The first point, the very first one there is the real big difference of what our SD-WAN offering is, right? Because we're bringing it back to our central data center and, basically providing all that routing, which allows us to provide you one of our IP addresses. And that's the big differentiator there. Dylan, do you think I missed anything?
No, everything, it looks like you covered pretty much everything there. If I think of anything, I'll raise it in one of the next slides.
Beautiful. So SD-WAN architecture. So like I mentioned, this is a very basic diagram, but it sort of shows that you've got three different ISPs. Well, actually, you've got ISP
two
one,
different
ISP.
Ones.
Yeah. And that could be a 4G service. That could be, whatever you want, right? So it could be their existing connection. It could be a new connection that you put in, whatever the case might be. It could just be a 4G service that you're temporarily putting in to get them out of hot water, whatever it might be. Each of these ISPs effectively connect back to us, right? And effectively tunnels are established between the bonder on site, which is the hardware on site, and our what we call SD-WAN aggregators, right? So we're connecting everything in, we're aggregating those into one big pipe for you. And then those two devices talk to each other, and that allows you to plumb in other services, right? So like I mentioned, putting a firewall in place, you could put a hosted firewall service in there. You could have all of that private network. Remember, this could be, you could add other sites into this. So, you can have, multiple sites sort of coming in here with, other offices, as well, and then providing that private network across into Azure, AWS, or even your physical co-location if you've got that sort of equipment as well.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to jump in there and mention is with the Antares portal, which is the management interface for our SD-WAN platform, it actually keeps all the config on there. So none of the config is stored permanently on the device. So if for whatever reason, the disk fails and all the config's lost and you have to replace the device, it's as simple as you punch a key in and it's reconfigured, ready to go. As long as you plugged everything back into where it was, it should just be plug and play.
It makes provisioning very easy as well. And I think that's the key thing about, sort of going back to what is SD-WAN. It's designed to be simple, right? It's designed so you don't necessarily have to have a networking, a network engineering degree or certifications to be able to manage this stuff. And so, from the Antares portal, when you create, you order the service, and we'll cover the provisioning process later. But the idea is you order it from us, you go in there and you get a key, right? Think of it like a serial number when you used to buy a video game and it used to be in the inside of your, I'm sure you can buy it these days online as well, right? I'm showing my age a bit there. But so it's a key, right? And when you plug the SD-WAN box in, it's going to ask for that key. You plug that key in, it just downloads its config, and away you go.
Yep.
Again, designed to be nice and simple.
Yeah, and then any future changes you make in the management portal, it's pushed straight down to the Bonder. And that way it's generally don't have to worry about multiple different devices having different settings and things like that. Even upgrading a Bonder from a small size, which we'll cover in a minute, small size to a larger one, exact same process. Punch the key in and it's ready to go.
Downloads the existing config, happy days.
Yep,
so
because the config across the board for all the different sizes pretty much the same. The only difference is the interfaces.
Yeah. So we'll go into the bonders. So these are the there's realistically 4 different types. First of all, we'll start with the virtual one, not in the particular order, but in terms of, I guess, cost and throughput. The virtual bonder is free, right? So there's no extra cost. There's no upfront cost to that. And you can spin that up on, anything really, VMware, Hyper-V, AWS, Azure, IBM Cloud, all those things. So you can spin that up to bring those sites in directly via a private network into the telco network itself, right? So versus having to configure, all those bits and pieces. It pretty much, you spin it up, you say, hey, I want the routing to go into this, and it just does it for you. Physical boxes, though, if you've got physical internet connections, obviously you need a physical box. So we've got 3 different types. We start off with the Edge 200, Edge 400, and then Edge 800. The differences are the number of Ethernet ports, and each Ethernet port can have an internet connection plugged into that. All right, so the Edge 200 can have 4 services, or 3 services plus your LAN, and then it can have, say, a USB failover as well. And we'll cover those bits and pieces. The Edge 200 is more about the limitations of the throughput, right? So the key thing to think about SD-WAN is because it's creating lots of tunnels, right? It's got encryption, it's got compression, it's got all these. If anyone's familiar with a firewall, the more things you turn on in a firewall, right? Or like a UTM, not like a, is my port open or closed, but in like a true UTM where you've got packet inspection, you've got, content filtering, you've got all those sort of different things. The more things you turn on, the less throughput you get, right? So the more powerful and the bigger box that you need to get that, higher throughput. So as a stupid number, if you stuck a 10 gig internet connection through, an SD-WAN box, or even a standard, like a Fortinet firewall or UTM, you're going to need a big box, to be able to process all of that, that flow. So realistically, it's the ports on these and the amount that the throughput that these boxes can handle. Okay, so if you've got a NBN typical failover, the Edge 200 is perfect. 100 by 40, and you might have a 4G failover. That little box, great, plug it in. We've got partners that put that out at every single MSP contract as part of their MSA. They basically say, hey, if you sign up with us, you've got to have one of these at every single site, because it centralizes everything. It makes the management way easier, and it keeps the client online, which, if you've got an unlimited support contract with them, decreases your cost because you're likely to get less support tickets. Right? Edge 400 is, again, just more ports, more, Edge 800 if you're going to go into higher speeds. So if you've got like an APT fiber 1000, that's the big bad boy that you're going to want to have. That being said, the real tech heads and the propeller heads amongst this, you could create a VMware box with a 1 gig card and do the networking on that if you so wanted to. And you can use the virtual bonder for free. Wouldn't recommend it in terms of like easiness, but you can certainly do that as well.
And one other good use case for the Edge 200, we actually had one of our guys here, Luke, do this up till recently. Because where he is up in Cessnock, he has terrible internet. And what he did in order to get some semblance of stable internet is he actually got 3 low speed services and bonded them together using this to get, I think it was like
Yeah,
70 by 30
yeah. Well,
or
so
something like that.
he couldn't get 100 by 40 on each of his connections, right? So he
Yeah.
ordered, I think, like 25 by 10s or whatever it was, and he bonded three of them to get higher because the copper in that street was just terrible. And if anyone knows much about copper, and we'll sort of touch on a little bit in this in a minute, but with copper, the more noise that's on the line, that's typically the slower speed, and the more instability that there is in that connection. So having the slower speed means that the service was nice and stable. So what he did is got three of them, bonded them together to get a decent service.
Yeah, and the only other thing I wanted to mention is when it comes to your fiber to the node or fiber to the building services, and it has to use the old school phone cable, those will actually
RJ11,
something like that. It's all I can remember is the old school phone cable. If you have a service like that, you will need another modem in bridge mode connected to this.
Good point.
Just because these guys only take RJ45, they don't take the phone line.
So these guys are a router, really. So right, they you can plug an Ethernet service directly into that. So let's say you get a Telstra service, right? You can plug that Telstra directly off the Telstra NTD or one of our NBN EE services straight off the NBN NTD straight into this box, right? And you can use this box as a router. What it is not, though, is not a modem, right? So if you think of like VDSL, so what are we talking? We're talking ADSL, VDSL based services. It's not going to provide that part. So you do need a modem in bridge mode to use it like this, right? So imagine if you're familiar with like a Fortinet where it doesn't have, that's I think it's RJ12, RJ11. I can't remember now, but it doesn't have that phone socket. It's not going to be a modem, right? So it's the same sort of thing. You have to put a modem in front of it. So if you do have a couple of, let's just say 3 VDSL services, like the example that Dylan gave of Luke, our ops manager, then your setup is going to be 3 internet connections coming in, 3 modems all going into the one box. So yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to mention before we moved on is just a point of the bonders actually don't care how or where they get their internet. Like quite literally, I could plug one just into my LAN, it'll get an IP from DHCP, and that'll work. It'll connect back to our servers, establish a tunnel, and if I connect something into the LAN port, it will see me as a completely different network, but it's going through my home internet. So that's a good way. You can also, if you're doing a big rollout for customers, you can just plug it into your office network and test everything as well, because it'll be identical to being on site. Yeah. So.
Cool. Okay. So one of the big things, this is what I wanted to talk about, and we touched on this a little bit last time. And this is sort of one of the smarts that SD-WAN does in general. And not just ours, but all SD-WAN typically does this. But in our terminology, we call this tuning of the leg, right? And each leg, our terminology of a leg or a link is just an internet connection, right? So that could be your NBN connection, or it could be, if you've got 3 NBN connections, we're referring to a specific one of those legs. Kind of ignoring the numbers here, but it does show a good representation. Basically, if anyone remembers BitTorrenting or something like that, and someone's trying to play video games in the house or something, if you saturate your internet connection, performance goes to hell. Right. So if you're flatlining that internet connection and you're on a voice call, you're, a Teams call, whatever it might be, or any real-time service, even trying to browse the web, right? Your latency is going to be impacted dramatically, right? Because your link is saturated, right? It sounds like 101, but the thing is that there's a sweet spot. Just because you get 100 by 40, NBN connection, you're never typically going to get that because of things like TCP overheads, capacity on the network, contention, so many aspects. But let's just say you get, 100 by 40 as a rule, just as an example. You'll often find that if you cap that connection, and you can do this on a normal router, right? You can sort of, you can set your actual, upload and download limits. And if you don't already, I definitely recommend that you do it. There's other reasons as well. But in this case, it is basically going to control your latency so let's just say that sweet spot is, I don't know, 90 megabits out of that 100, right? If you hit that, you can sort of see here, right? So I'm going to just draw on the screen. So the throughput as you go up, right, you'll find that, you know, your flat line and your latency at this point, right? So this is the point here. All of a sudden, it starts to go up, right? So if you keep your downloads around here, it's kind of the sweet spot, right? And so what this tuning does is, and it's important that you do this with the service, because if you've got 3 different connections, each leg might be slightly different. Again, if we're talking something like VDSL, each of those underlying phone lines, old school, you know, copper lines, might have slightly different noise profiles on them, because, you know, it might be old school wiring in the building, out in the street. Hey, it could have rained recently, whatever it might be. And it will tune that to find the sweet spot for each of those links. And the system does it periodically. Typically, it'll do it at night, but you can actually punch the button in the portal to do it yourself as well. And the idea is it will basically sort of set that limit of that connection so that each of those 3 or however many connections that you've got in there can be smashed as hard as you want, but it won't impact latency, right? So that way you really can aggregate all of those connections without having those adverse effects of, you know, really pumping that connection. And you don't necessarily lose too much of that overall, you know, download speed, but if you do, you will lose a bit. But if you think of what a business wants, they care about reliability, right? They care about, you know, the response time. You know, if you're thinking on a voice call, they don't want crackling, they don't want those sort of things. But all it takes is a Windows update or someone to download something, and on a standard service without this, they can flood that link. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, so sorry, I better clear the screen every time I do that. So best practices. Dylan, do you want to take this one?
Yep. So one of the biggest things we recommend to all of our partners is use LTE as a just for failover. In some cases, you may need to use LTE as the primary. We had a good situation where a partner did a big rollout using Optus SIMs, and it turned out that VoIP wouldn't work over them because VoIP doesn't work very well through double NAT. So to get around that and to avoid not having to break a contract because they signed a rather big contract with Optus, we put bonders out at each of the sites, plug the LTE in, and bam, there's no longer any double NAT issues because it creates that tunnel back to us, and VoIP would work without a problem. So LTE is very, very handy. The only catch with that is make sure that if it's in, say, a building, like in a rack or anything, make sure it's got an external antenna, because I can't tell you how many times I've been trying to troubleshoot LTE issues and it turns out it's in a rack with no reception.
Oh yeah, test it, please. Yeah. If you're going to stick it in, and that's one of the ones that we do get a lot of support tickets for. It's like, oh, you know, it failed over and the performance wasn't very good. Or do some quality testing when you install the service to get a bit of a feel for it. Make sure it's got signal. You know, I typically don't recommend. I mean, you can get a 4G modem. That's one of those USB dongles, and you can plug it into the USB port on the device. I typically don't recommend that. Use something, spend a little bit of extra money, and buy something like a Teltonica, right?
Yeah.
Because the Teltonica is effectively a modem, right? LTE modem that you can put, I don't know, you can run a network cable to it and put it really high on the roof so it gets really good signal, and then just run a network cable down and plug it into one of the RJ45 ports. But yeah, we do get probably more tickets than I'd like there with LTE signal. And when you install it, test it, see how that failover is going to work, so you can set that expectation for the client.
Yeah. So the other thing is SLAs, even just ESLAs, because SD-WAN's great, has failover and everything, but it doesn't guarantee that the service goes offline and it's going to come back on quickly. So it's still important to have that enhanced SLA on the underlying service, so they're not running off, say, a 4G SIM, because that could run out of data, or they could be running over a copper line that's only a 50 by 20, which might not be fast enough for what they need. It'd be fine in a pinch, but it's not really something they want to be running off permanently. So it's still kind of important to get that SLA to keep them online with their primary service.
Yeah, give an example, right? So what we've seen happen more than once is you've got an LTE plugged in, all right, but NBN has an outage, right? For whatever reason, but it's an extended outage. Not something that hosted network can control, whether connections with us or someone else, but an actual NBN outage. And the ESLA, from which if it's from us or whoever your RSP is, you can purchase that ESLA. It's an add-on, allows you to make sure that your support call with NBN gets prioritized as a business and not behind the mums and dads with a Netflix speed issue, because Netflix isn't playing in 4K. All right. If you don't have that ESLA, then you don't get that prioritization, right? And it means that in terms of the queue of getting a contractor job booked in to say get a piece of equipment replaced or get someone to go look at it, it could be a tree down and they still may not prioritize it. So you've having that, it doesn't replace, if let's say you don't have it and you've got that extended outage, you might be running on 4G for a couple of days, right? Having that ESLA ensures, that the, NBN will prioritize your request. And whether it's NBN or Telstra ESLA, same sort of thing. They don't call it an ESLA, they just call it an SLA. But having that SLA ensures that they're going to prioritize that. If not, just treat it as a best effort service and account for it. And if the client doesn't want to spend the money, for anyone that deals with sales on here, if the client doesn't want to spend the money, set that expectation, right? And put it in writing so that, they don't, when they do bite your head off, because they probably will, because they're getting the connection from you and it's down, you can't do anything about it. You can at least say, hey, told you.
Because if you've just got the standard support, it's best effort essentially. Whereas the ESLA, it actually sets deadlines on when they need to complete things, assuming it's not a hardware issue, like someone's cut the fiber. There's not much they can do about that. With
NBN, and not so much with Telstra and whatnot, but with NBN, it goes to an entirely different support team, right? So we literally, if we don't have one and we submit a fault with them, we're sitting behind every mum and dad, and there's, I don't know, there's a big update for Fortnite or something, and it's being really slow.
So that's where it's also kind of important. I'm jumping ahead a few points here. Carrier diversity. It's great to have multiple different types of connections. So you might have a fiber, like just standard NBN fiber, and then have an EE or a wireless service. It's all great to have those, but if they're all through the same carrier and that carrier goes offline, you're kind of screwed. So it's a good idea to get an say one through us and one through Aussie, or Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, we can do on-net and off-net.
Yeah, we can do off-net. So if when you're ordering, you can actually make a note to say request that the connection be off-net, which means we don't route it via our network.
So it'll go through our carrier network, like our direct carriers network, or we'll route it over, say, someone like Telstra or something like that.
Correct. Yeah.
So that way, if we go offline, you guys can still work. Everything will still work.
Yeah.
And
because there could be a, let's just say, I don't know, and the next point of this is technology diversity, not just carrier diversity, right? So let's just say that you've got 3 NBN connections in there, but NBN has an outage in the area. Well, all of those 3 are now dead in the water, which is why you want to have, at least 2 different technology types. This is best practice, right? And we all know that not all clients are going to spend the money, but sort of actually, putting that to them and saying, hey, this is what we recommend, whether it be, and it's obviously, it depends on their use case. Putting in a super high-end and expensive system for a small business doesn't make sense, but it could just be a Vodafone SIM card for the 4G failover. That again, you've got your NBN, but you've got the 4G, which is now or 5G even. That is again, you've got that different medium, right? So if NBN goes out, it's not impacted. My preference, if I'm designing these things, is and again, if budget's not limited, is a primary fiber service with, say, a fixed point wireless service, right? And that fixed point wireless, the reason I like it is that you get predictable latencies typically, and higher speeds than you typically get for, say, 4G, and sometimes even 5G. And it's a point to point, right? So it's it's going directly back to a tower versus like 4G, which is, you're going to connect to different towers and things like that. So fiber and a fixed point wireless service is my sweet spot if the client can afford it. But yeah, just keep that in mind. Carrier, so that's like hosted and Telstra, and technology, NBN. It could be you could even from the point, it could be a NBN enterprise Ethernet fiber service, right? and you could also have a Telstra fiber service, but they could be sharing the same pits, right? So that fiber could be going out the front of their building, and I don't know, someone's digging up the garden for whatever reason, and they just dig up that fiber completely, right? Wouldn't be the first time. The entire FPOS network was offline about a year and a half ago because of just that. Alexandria in Sydney, someone dug up the streets out front of Equinix and took off the FPOS network and took out Telstra, it took out Vocus, because all their fibers were in the same pits. So using that different technology is very important.
Yeah, and the other thing we also see a lot is people upgrade the underlying connections to a fast speed, but not actually check if their bonder can support that speed. Like we had one the other day where they originally had a single 100x40 and an LTE, and they decided to upgrade that 100x40 to I think it was an EE, and then they just kept having speed issues. I couldn't understand why. Worked out because the Bonder can only handle up to 200 meg. It's not going to handle the speeds that an EE would provide.
Yeah, if you purchase like a I don't know, like a Fiber 1000 or a EE 1000, a gig service, and you plug it into one of those little boxes, just keep that in mind, because it might you might leave you a little bit red faced when you have to go back to your client and go, oh, well, actually we've got to upgrade this as well. So if you've got that, keep that in mind, and that should be for regardless of SD-WAN. You should always think about the hardware that you're actually using. If it's a firewall, some of the smaller boxes aren't even going to handle a gig, when you add in all of those UTM features, right? So more of them will these days, but if you've got, I don't know, like an older piece of equipment and it's been in there, it's not working, and you just upgrade that connection, just be aware of it.
Yeah.
What else haven't we covered there? The second one, we didn't go in order, Dylan. We should have gone from top to bottom.
No, I decided to jump around a bit and make it
difficult for everyone. So the quality, and this is actually we've talked, jumping right to the bottom, we talked about carrier diversity, but we also talked about technology. But the quality of those underlying links is critical. Putting SD-WAN over it, and excuse the language, doesn't stop a shit internet connection from being shit.
If anything, it's going to cause more issues.
Correct.
SD-WAN is going to be flapping between the two connections, and it is noticeable.
Yeah. So, two VDSL copper lines that don't equal the same quality as, say, a fiber service, right? So adding SD-WAN over the top of two, it's going to add extra bandwidth, it's going to aggregate them, but your stability issues aren't going to disappear, right? So you still need to have a quality underlying link. And I'm not dissing VDSL or copper-based services at all, because there's plenty of them out there, but they have issues, right? We get more support tickets for VDSL and fiber to the node than any other NBN technology type. So be aware of that, right? So the SD-WAN portal helps you with that, because it will actually allow you, and we'll talk about troubleshooting in a second, but you can see the link and you can see the underlying latency and the packet loss on that link. But yeah, just keep that in mind. At the end of the day, it's kind of like the LTE signal. If the LTE signal is crap, it's, when it fails over, the experience is going to be crap. I'm being a bit blunt, but hopefully you get the point. I think that's probably the main ones. Oh, the last one, the second last one, because we didn't go in order. Sorry, guys. Just bookmark the management portal. Make sure it's in your documentation, those sort of things, because if again, to be blunt, when shit hits the fan, you want to make sure you got things on hand. So just make sure you bookmark and document that. Did I cover everything, Dylan, or did we cover everything? Yeah. Oh, the last one.
Covered everything.
If you've got failover connectivity, I mentioned before, but test it periodically. I see it so often that we get, and it's not too much of a regular thing, but we get tickets and it's like, oh, hey, we had failover, but there was high latency or whatever the case, and it was, or it didn't work as I expected. Test it. If you're using 4G, I don't know, Optus or Telstra may have done something with their towers. Next door could have built a new building next door, and it could be impacting your signal strength. The client could have moved furniture around in their office. There's a lot of factors with those bits and pieces. So, test regularly if you've got failover, and that should be for anything, whether you've got, DR and things like that. And potentially charge it. charge for it. You know, tell your client you're going to do it 4 times a year and charge for it. But saves potential headaches down the line.
Definitely.
Right. Okay, so moving on to troubleshooting. So things aren't working quite as expected. You're getting support tickets, clients, you know, having issues, whatever it might be. We're going to go top to bottom here. And I think I said earlier, but we will send these out afterwards. So these slides, you can refer back to it. You can book on one-on-one, you know, and you can obviously just call us for support as well. But Dylan, from top to bottom.
Yep. So the first point is if every single service on site is offline, so they're completely dead in the water, and it might be as simple as the ISP requires you to change your static IP on it. If that is not done before it goes offline, you cannot make changes to the bonder without it having any internet access, because as I mentioned before, everything is done through the management portal. It doesn't actually let you do it on the device to avoid having inconsistencies in the config. But the upside to that is, as I mentioned before, all it needs is an internet connection if it's using DHCP. So if you have a DHCP port, you could plug it into anywhere. You could take it next door and plug it in, and it will connect. It will download the config, and then you can take it back, and it should come back online. That leads into the second point. Before making any changes to any of the interfaces, you always want to make sure that the secondary connection is online, because that way, if you do make a change and it knocks the service out, you're not in a situation where you can't make any changes. So you've still got the ability to kind of recover. I can't say how many times we've experienced that. And there's been one case where the site was 3 hours away. They made a change, accidentally put the wrong IP address in, and now they can't access anything. So they actually
go back to the point about testing failover.
Yep, it's very important to test failover. So exactly with the second point here, make sure your secondary connection or your failover is online, because if it doesn't work, it'll at least fail over to that.
Yeah, with the changes as well, to build on what Dylan was saying, they're queued, right? So they're the management portal. You make the change via the portal. Hey, I'm going to change this IP address. I'm going to, you know, whatever it might be. Those changes are queued, right? So if all of a sudden that device comes online and you've just made, I don't know, 20 changes trying to troubleshoot something, everything's going to get pushed down. Yeah. Right. So you could make this situation worse. So I guess what I'm saying is start with the basics, right? Don't necessarily go, oh, hey, yeah. And that's the same for any, if you've got a cloud managed Ubiquity, if you've got, Meraki, they're cloud managed, they've got that config is all pushed from a central server somewhere in the world. So that approach stays the same. You're not directly connecting into the box and making the changes there. So just be aware of that. Don't make a situation, a bad situation worse.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads into the next one is if you log into say the management portal and you notice your LTE is offline, the very, very first thing you should do is get someone to plug it into a PC or laptop and confirm it actually gets internet access. There's been a fair few times where we've been going around in circles trying to troubleshoot why this LTE is not working. There was actually a problem with the SIM, whether that be there's a physical fault with the SIM or they just didn't pay the bill. It could be a few different things. In some cases,
or anything like that.
Yeah, as simple as that as well.
Go back to the point about testing in the failover. Make sure it actually works, because and Dylan's right. These notes aren't, we haven't just sort of made them up. We actually looked through our support tickets and went, okay, what are we going to cover? How can we help you guys avoid some of the pitfalls that other partners have made? And that LTE failover is a common one. Either, like Dylan said, the bill doesn't get paid. Someone cancels it off because they see it on their Vodafone or their Telstra bill, and they're like, oh, I don't need it. I'll just cancel it off. And all of a sudden, when failover happens, it doesn't work. But yeah, so just test, please.
Yeah. So, and with monitoring of the bonds, we quite frequently see a lot of people that just monitor the actual CP-WAN IP, which is our IP we give to you across that tunnel, but they don't monitor the underlying legs. And due to the way SD-WAN works is it's very rare for the actual bonder itself to be causing any latency or packet loss. It's always the underlying legs. It could be one of them is having a high packet loss and the other's fine. But because of that, you'll start having across the entire bonder having packet loss, because it's trying to push everything through that aggregated connection, but one of them's constantly going offline.
So if you're using, I guess, from a troubleshooting process, and again, this kind of goes back to like start with the basics, right? And the basics are always the underlying connections, right? Because SD-WAN is an overlay technology, right? It sits over the top of the underlying links, right? So start with the underlying links as you're troubleshooting. If you're getting experience, the basics, right? Are they online? Do a ping test to their public IP address, right? If you've got a monitoring system, something like Ping Plotter, plug that IP address in. Obviously, if it's got a dynamic IP, you're going to have to find out what the IP is first, but test that underlying link, do a trace route. Make sure that, if they're 2 different ISPs or 3 different ISPs underneath, you might actually find that one link is failing on, part way up the path, right? SD-WAN's not going to necessarily know that because, I don't know, there could just be high latency on one of those hops, right? But from the portal, you just disable that connection temporarily or something like that. But again, it's probably the most common, and you'll see it when we come back to you. We go, hey, often we're asking you to turn on something like ICMP, even if it's like an NBN connection. If you're saying, hey, we're getting dropouts and things like that, and that's because we're adding it into our monitoring for you, right? We'll add it into our monitoring so that we can graph it. And if we need to go to like NBN or something, we can go, hey, here we go. That helps you, even if you are just doing a good old ping and just sort of running it. I always like something like Ping Plotter. I know a bunch of our partners use it, so if you don't already have that, have a look at it. But yeah, just getting those basics really will help you have a faster resolution time. And in most cases, not even need to contact us, because you can just go, oh yeah, okay, this connection's getting packet loss. I'll disable it temporarily. Yeah, you might drop your failover and you might drop your total speed, but the client's experience is going to be a lot better because the good one might be okay. But again, when we talked about potentially having 2 VDSL, if it's rained recently and I don't know, the pit out the front of the building is flooded and there's water in the copper lines, all of those multiple lines might be being impacted. So you might have a bigger issue. And that's where we, and that doesn't matter whether it's our SD-WAN or if it's SD-WAN of any, you may not even have SD-WAN. You may just have that connection plugged straight into a good old TP-Link router. You have to start with the basics. You'll get a faster resolution time. And when you submit a support ticket to us, let us know what you've done, so we're not reinventing the wheel, right? So we can go, okay, cool, all right. And that way we can assist you to get to a faster resolution. But yeah, start with those basics, check the underlying links.
Yeah, so, and what Ben mentioned earlier leads into this next point about changes being queued. If you make 50 million changes on it when it's offline and push to it, I have actually seen a Bonder crash because too many things were queued up and it just tried to do too much at once.
Yeah, not to mention you don't know what it's hard to remember what you've changed because you're trying to, if you don't keep this in mind, and this is important for if you've got techs that are just occasionally touching this, that they know this so that they don't just go making random changes, and maybe they're not making random changes, but making changes in general. Yeah. And then expecting, oh, okay, because it's not trial and error then, in a lot of cases in IT, we can do trial and error, right? Oh, hey, yep, does that error disappear? Yep, cool, all right, I know, all right, I'll try this, whatever the case. With this, you're queuing all those changes. All right, cool, I finally fixed it because, I don't know, the underlying link was actually the issue. That's been resolved. I don't know, NBN's fixed their issue or whatever it might be. The links come back on, connections come back on, all that config's been downloaded. Oh, I just killed it.
It's happened many times.
Yeah.
So, and the next one, this is handy in Antares. It actually gives you full access to your CPU memory, bandwidth graphs, latency for each of the individual legs, as well as across the entire bond. So you can go look back, I think it goes back about a year, that, okay, they frequently have reporting issues between these set times throughout the day. Is maybe the bandwidth going through the roof at the time? They might be introducing packet loss, which might mean, okay, maybe you need to implement QoS or you need to scale down the speed a little bit so it doesn't hit packet loss, things like that. But if you notice that, okay, maybe the CPU is incredibly high, that might indicate a hardware issue. Maybe it's just not going to cope with what they're trying to do. It could be a few different things, but we give you access to look at those graphs and actually go make the determination of whether maybe it's a hardware issue or if it's an underlying leg issue, because at the end of the day, it could be a bunch of different things.
Yeah, having access to those graphs and data. I mean, they're what we use as well for troubleshooting, right? So yeah, you're looking at the same data as we are. in those cases. So
yeah, it's the exact same data. The only extra thing that we have access to is it's handy in the situation, the third last point there. We can actually see things that are queued up in the thing. We can't get rid of them, but we can see if they're queued or whether they've been pushed through successfully. That's just a little extra bit we can see from the back end. So if something does suddenly go wrong, we can go, okay, well, maybe there a change. And we can sort of determine that and go back and make that change things back, things like that. And one very, very handy thing that one of our partners does, and it's actually fairly smart for them, is they actually have one of these SD-WAN bonders with a 4G dongle, and they use that for failover box, just like an ad hoc failover box for their customers. And it actually got them out of hot water because they got a call from their customer that tree loppers had come out and cut the fiber to their building because the fiber was not buried deep enough. And within about 20 minutes, they were back online, business resumed. They had to work with around a few minor issues with the IP address, but for the most part, they were back online. And they could keep working while NBNCo came out and fixed the line.
Yeah, it should probably be in the best practice one, not the troubleshooting tips, but
Probably,
yeah,
yes.
Having a box on standby, and you don't even need to have the service activated. We can activate the service really quickly for you. Give us a call. Hey guys, I need this done urgently. We'll get it done for you. So that way you're not necessarily paying to have the SD-WAN service. You can just activate it as needed, or just have it as standby. Get a SIM card. That's even maybe, for those of you that have got like a Telstra data plan, like I know that we have all of our mobiles add a stupid amount of data to our data plan. And you can just get a data SIM, extra $10 a month, and it gets your client out of hot water. So that's quite a good option for those, especially for those clients and we've all got them, that don't want to spend the money on, a more reliable solution like the SD-WAN. And hey, maybe they will see it as a, hey, my main connection went out, SD-WAN saved the day. And then they can order that from you, and then you can sort of put that one back to bed.
I definitely wish we had that a few years back when we had a customer who their fiber got cut 4 times in a month by the same tree loppers. That was a fun time because they were offline for about a month and a half while everything got fixed.
Especially when you get stability and things like that, being able to stick that out there. And all right, so that's basically the majority of our, when we've looked at our support tickets, these are the kind of the things that they stood out to us as things that we felt that you would benefit from. I think I've actually got it here in this slide, but we're a little bit over time, so we won't really do a demo of the portal and whatnot. But if you do want to sort of do a run through, let us know. If there's anything that you want us to cover or show you how to do, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm going to quickly cover a slide just on the sort of the overall provisioning process, but drop it into the chat and we can run through it, show you how to do it in the portal or whatnot. We should also mention, speaking of the portal, that there is a new version coming out. Don't have an exact ETA, but we are testing a few new features. We mentioned it last time, and that's the slide I think I've got hidden. But it's basically data intelligence will be in there as well. So you'll be able to see a lot more analytics into what's actually happening in the system, what people are doing, what sites they're going to, that sort of stuff. And so, so that feature is coming. There will be a basic version that will be included at no extra cost, but there is also a new portal coming that has a bunch of new features as well. But I don't quite have an ETA. I expect to be sort of in the next 3 to 6 months, but with all these things, I don't want to promise. So if you've got any questions, want us to run through, stick it in the chat. I will quickly run through the provisioning process, and it's dead simple. It really is. Via the partner portal, you can place an order for the service. It goes to our service delivery team, and your account manager can help you if you're not quite sure what you need to order. Just call your account manager or shoot an email through to sales and we can raise a draft order for you, which then you basically just got to accept. We ship the hardware to either you, so you order that SD-WAN box or what we call an SD-WAN node, that we ship that to you. And like we've mentioned before, when you're ready, once you've configured it in the portal, which is the next step, you configure the service with your each of the connections. If it's whatever the authentication types, maybe one connection's PPOE, maybe one connection's DHCP, and you configure that so that when you go to site, you plug your box in, it downloads its config, or potentially you do that at your office, download its config at your office, go to site, plug it in, happy days. Very, very, very simple. Dylan mentioned as well that you can actually do a lot of that staging and whatnot from anywhere as well. You know, a lot of us are working from home still. So if you've got techs working from home, they can still stage it at their house. We can ship the hardware to them, or wherever you want. Just tell us in your order, and we'll make it happen.
Do have a good example of that I'll cover once you finish this as well.
I think, well, it's only a 4-step process, so it was a nice and easy slide.
So when Ben was just mentioning everyone working from home a moment ago, we actually had a partner the other day who was doing a big rollout for 4 sites, all new hardware, networking hardware, everything. So managed switches, routers and everything. They quite literally, the guy set up in his dining room 4 of the SD-WAN Bonders, plugged everything in. So he had 3 stacks and simulated as if it was on site. So you could check that the site-to-site routing was working. So that way, when he was on site, just plugged it in and left pretty much. You didn't really have to spend much time at all.
Yeah, so you can spin up a real loud, and this stuff is, again, you know, so you don't need a CCNP or, you know, a Cisco certification or something. You don't need to know BGP, those bits and pieces. The idea is it's much more plug and play, or point and click. So, you know, your more junior techs can be handling this stuff, and you don't have to, you know, you can tackle the more complicated networking problems more cost effectively. So. All right, well, guys, we don't have any actual questions or things that have come through, unless I've missed anything. Have I missed? Nope, I haven't.
I can't see any.
So, as always, the last slide here is we provide free training, right, on all of our services, whether it's a one-on-one, whether it's a refresher, whether it's with your whole technical team. You know, we did the NBN diagnostics and troubleshooting training with, you know, the entire technical team of one of our partners only 11 o'clock today. And, you know, back in the day, we used to do things like pizza and beer and trying to make it a bit more fun. These days it's remote, but users, we're there to help you guys. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, we want you guys to have a good experience. We want you to, you know, we've got knowledge, we can transfer it. If you've got a newbie starting and they're green and you need to get them up to speed in certain areas, we'll help you train that, schedule it in. The link's on the screen there. That's to book in Dylan as well. So Dylan will do the training. Dylan's our training coordinator here. Might be other people that you're doing the training with, depending on the service, whatnot. But you know, we're all about your success. Your success at the end of the day is our success. So you know, even if it's a bit left of field, you're not sure. You know, reach out to your account manager. Reach out to Meryl Palmer if you don't deal with her already. Our partner success manager, and Meryl can actually put a training schedule together with you guys, depending on the services and things that you want to do. So yeah.
And just want to throw it out there as well. A few partners do it where they've got a big project coming up and they just want to block out an hour to just run over a few things, get our suggestions.
100%, yeah.
You can even do that. More than happy to do that.
That's what we're there for, right? So if you're working in it, it may not even be tied into all of our services. Not sure how things are going to come together. Even the project plan, leverage us. We've done these things hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So you know, we've got a lot of best practice. We know a lot of the pitfalls to avoid, and we can guide you through the process. Whether you're new to it or you just need a refresher, you know, sing out. We're here to help. So yeah. That's the thank you slide, but as we've not had any questions yet, we will wrap it up there. Again, guys, this will be recorded, so the wonderful Jesse from our marketing team will send out the recording the next day or so. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.